consider this a professional courtesy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to a brand spanking new week, folks. Hope you had a great weekend. Mine was kind of interesting. I did a little browsing for some investment properties. I've expanded my search into areas I've normally, I'll be honest, that I've not paid much attention to because either I didn't like them or I had very little exposure to them. I wanted to get some ground truth. Granted, there are some areas that I absolutely am not interested in investing there. But I also understand, just because I don't want to, doesn't mean those areas don't present opportunities for some investors. I know folks who are perfectly comfortable with going into areas that are a little bit more dicey and doing real well there. Really not my cup of tea. There's certain headaches I just would like to avoid. So there you go. To each his own. But nothing can substitute for that ground truth. Get in there, drive around, see what you can find, see what tickles your fancy, and figure out if those things will work for you. We got a couple of different topics to hit today. One kind of a broader economy kind of a thing that I think is interesting to note. And another, a very real estate specific one. So stay tuned for that. I think we're going to have some interesting brain food for you today. As always, the very best way to reach out and get in contact with me is through the website. So head on over to therebelbroker.com. From there, you can send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. Don't make it a secret on how to reach out. Just click that contact button in the menu bar and you'll be able to reach out that way. If you would like to support the show, take a second to click the big red button at the top of the page. Title, take the survey to support the show. No big secret there. It's not encoded. It will really just ask you to do a really quick survey. It'll ask you your email address twice. Make sure you use the same email address both times because in addition to you helping the show, you will also be entering yourself into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, that's something we tend to do at the beginning of each month. So we're a couple of weeks away from the next drawing, but jump in. We've given out a whole lot of money so far. Congrats to the folks who've already won, and good luck to those of you who are still waiting for your chance for that $50 Amazon gift card. Now, of course, there's also the Rebel Underground. Feel free to head over to therebelbroker.com. There'll be a link there as well to join the Rebel Underground. And I'd also like to let everyone know about one more thing. Now, I've kind of casually been supporting a thing called the Rebel Broker Network. And basically what that is a way for me to pair up buyers or sellers with good agents in their area. And the way I've facilitated that is at my website, soldbyrobert.com. You can also get there by going to wandsons.com. I've got a ton of different links. TheBetterAgent.com, soldandmorganhill.com. Tons and tons of different URLs will go to that site. But that's the business side, really. That's not the show side. But there's a link there to join the Rebel Network. And what happens there is agents come to me, give me their area of focus, where they sell, where they buy, where they help folks buy and sell. And then I do an interview process with them, and I ask them questions that fit in kind of nicely with what I've talked about here on the show in terms of the kind of agent they're likely to be. So I jump through those hoops for you. We kind of pre-qualify the agents for you, and then I connect you to, and I get a referral fee from that agent if you guys end up closing a deal together. So it works out great and helps to support the show. And you end up having a fantastic agent, or that's the hope. And if you don't have a fantastic agent, I want to know, because I absolutely have no intention of referring someone to agents that aren't up to snuff, right? So that's always the goal. But if I find agents who answer those initial questions correctly, I think you're well on your way to finding an agent who's going to be more focused on your needs than some other numbers that really don't have anything to do with your individual success in real estate. I've kind of expanded the way I can get access to more agents. Now, not only I encourage real estate agents out there to go to my website and submit their information. so that you can be part of that. But also, I found another place to really be able to go out there and proactively search for agents. It's kind of an agent exclusive setup. So the good news is I've got way more referrals to send you much faster. So if you as a buyer or a seller would like to get a referral for an agent in your area, reach out to me through the website, and I will be more than happy to turn you on to an agent that you should at least put into the corral of agents you're going to interview to get the best possible service you can. And I think my pre-screening will go a long way towards assuring you're getting some pretty top-notch candidates. So that's a reach out for those of you who are both agents who want to be in the network, but also to buyers and sellers out there who would be interested in tracking down a good agent. Okay. Which one should we start with? I think we'll start with the casual chat, which is really more of an economics thing, and not horribly casual. I mean, it's about sort of the big economic benefits we've been reaping over the last few months, but also since the new tax bill got passed. And it really comes down to something we talked about on this show years ago. Now, I know there's a few of you who've been listening almost since the beginning. You'll recall, I don't even know how many years ago. I remember us doing this quite a bit, trying to figure out what would be big ways to really get more cash flowing in the U.S. system. And of course, like anything else, it's a double-edged sword, right? But let's talk about the good edge first, because it's happening. We talked about smart ways that you could get big companies to bring money back into the United States. And to the tune of over $1.2 trillion, companies have already announced money that they're going to bring in from overseas back to the United States. Why? Because of the tax cuts, because now they're not going to pay this horrible punitive 30+% tax on any money they bring back into the United States. We've talked about this extensively in past shows, but it was extensively discussed a couple of years ago last. I don't think we've talked about it in at least that amount of time. But the point is, Apple Computer has committed to building new facilities in the United States, and all of this money, all this infrastructure that's going to get built is going to feed directly into jobs. Tons of companies, in addition to announcing higher minimum wages for folks that work for their companies, have made bigger commitments. I mean, the whole minimum wage thing for companies deciding to go to a higher minimum wage is great. But the really amazing thing is all of this infrastructure stuff requires people to be sitting in chairs in them, right? You don't build a building to do something and then not put people in it. So that implies not just they're going to build new factories, new research facilities, et cetera. It implies they're going to hire a whole ton of people to fill them, right? To come up with a new thing, to come up with whatever the latest development is in their business in the coming years. And this is happening quite a bit across the board. When you get some big names like Apple doing things like this, I can't help but think that over the next 2 to 3 months, we are going to see a whole lot more companies jumping on this bandwagon. And the potential amount of money that could be repatriated goes way beyond the 1.2 trillion. Now, that's a huge number, but the potential bubble of repatriated cash could be amazing. Now, just to give you a little bit of perspective, it's estimated, according to Fortune magazine, that there is more than $2.6 trillion in corporate profits that are sitting in foreign bank accounts waiting for a tax break to be freed up. All kinds of companies I know are sitting on tons of cash, not just Apple. All the big high-tech firms, and this was something, again, we talked about years ago. To do a recap, one reason why you've seen so much growth in companies building facilities overseas, whether you want to talk about Comcast building stuff in India, or you want to talk about Apple building stuff in China and India and Ireland, if you want to talk about Cisco opening stuff overseas, it's not because they actively went out there and said, let's find someplace outside the United States. It's because if they had taken the money from their international sales and repatriated it to the United States, it would have taken such a huge chunk out of it, it did not make sense to do it. So they would then go to countries, since it was already floating out there internationally, they'd go places where they could invest this money in infrastructure and doing things without such a heavy tax burden. Well, with changes in these taxes having just been announced and passed, it's looking super attractive for companies to bring this stuff back. And what's also interesting is a lot of these companies that have done things overseas almost begrudgingly. Now, I've talked to clients from all over. I have clients who work for all the big high-tech companies in the Valley. I talked to all kinds of different folks. And every company I just mentioned, I have talked to folks. I've represented folks in the purchase or sale of their property. And this topic has come up in conversation. And some of them were at a level where it was easy to have a conversation about why these companies made these decisions. And the bottom line was they would rather, today the modern thought with a lot of high-tech companies is, we'd rather do it in the United States. We've because this isn't new, right? You can remember in the 90s, there was a big push and there was an awful lot of growth in call centers and whatnot in other countries. Well, most of those failed, right? You had the call center thing pop up in Ireland. You had it pop up in India. You had it pop up in China. You had all these various places where things were getting put overseas, and the bang for the buck just wasn't there. Was it cheaper to do? Yeah, but the quality of what you got out of it wasn't as high. We've also evolved through Eastern European countries where a lot of this stuff gets contracted out to. And so many of these companies have kind of learned the lesson that we should really bring it back locally, that's what they'd rather do. So, and we're seeing that in terms of money that's being transferred back to the United States. Now, according again to Fortune magazine, the new GOP tax law allows U.S. companies to repatriate cash at reduced rates for a limited time. As a part of the tax reform, repatriation tax rates could be as low as 8% compared to the 35% companies traditionally pay to repatriate that money. Now, despite what some folks tell you, and I know a lot of the talking heads say, this trickle-down thing doesn't work. Well, and they say companies don't reinvest their capital. They hoard it for themselves or just give it to the executives. And they say that history doesn't bear that out. Well, history actually doesn't bear out their point. Whenever companies tend to have an excess of cash, unless they feel they are in very risky times, because remember, we do have some companies out there with billions of dollars in cash reserves, unless they're convinced something bad might happen, which usually makes them hoard their cash, not pay more to the executives, hoard it so that the company can run in case there's a bad thing that happens. But typically what they do is reinvest it. You end up going into research and development, you build new facilities, you grow. That's typically what money gets used for by these corporations. Because they can now bring this money back into the United States from overseas, and particularly at a rate as low as 8%, you're going to see tons of growth in a lot of different jobs all across the United States. Some companies have announced that what they'll pay for the repatriation taxes. Others are expected to report their losses in the near future. Microsoft has yet to announce exactly how it will be affected by the tax reform, but its latest quarterly report cites the company has $132 billion in overseas funds. And then, of course, this Fortune article also includes a list of all the different companies that are bringing money back in the United States. Apple, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, American Express, JP Morgan Chase, and there's more. So, and the total amount here is huge. It's trillions of dollars. So that's all good news, right? There's nothing bad about any of that. That equals jobs. Jobs equals higher employment. Higher employment at a decent wage equals more folks who can buy a house. All right. Now we take a step into bad stuff, assuming the market doesn't respond appropriately. This change will create more buyers, right? Just naturally. If you end up with more people making more money who already have a job and more people getting a job or having a more career-focused job, this could solve a whole lot of the problems we've seen with employment prior to this tax reform. Remember, the kind of jobs that we were seeing expanding the most weren't career-focused jobs. They tended to be part-time jobs. They tended to be, hourly jobs. They tended to be in the service industry. With this kind of reintroduction of money into the business world in the United States, you're going to see a different kind of job cropping up. You're going to see all kinds of positions opening up that would be career-style jobs. So, and again, all good. But downside number one, it creates more buyers in an environment where we're already inventory challenged. So that means we need to start cranking out more inventory. And no matter what anybody's telling you about what's getting built, we are still nowhere near where we need to be in order to meet demand in terms of the amount of housing that's being put on the market, particularly since sellers have been so reluctant to sell their homes and move on to other properties. Now, we're seeing a bit of an increase this year. We may see more sellers coming online to sell their properties, but there's still such low inventory that it's not even a drop in the bucket, even if we're super optimistic, I think, for the first part of this year. Okay, so that's potential downside number one. Again, I would not discourage the repatriation of this money based on that downside, right? I still think I think in terms of people's lives, regardless of what it does to anything else, this repatriation of cash is a good thing. It's awesome. In fact, I don't think it should cost you a dime to repatriate money. I think it's stupid that because you've made money doing your business in another country, that somehow the government of the United States thinks that money should be taxed when you bring it back into the United States. They should be begging. They should get a tax break for bringing this money back into the United States. So I'm not real sure what the logic there is. I've talked with an awful lot of folks about it, some of you, as a matter of fact, with no real good answer on why. What is the underpinnings of the assumption of why a company that's already paid whatever taxes are required out in the universe, right? Because if this is money they made from making sales in Europe, there's taxes they already paid in Europe. Why in the world would a country like the United States want to charge you for bringing money back into the United States? I mean, it's just, I don't get it. So anyway, the other thing for me is inflation. We're talking about over $2 trillion potentially could be repatriated in a relatively short time. Now, remember, this article from Fortune mentions that there's a narrow window. So there's going to be a great deal of enthusiasm from some companies to figure out how to get that 8% rate to repatriate their cash. So many have been sitting on this money for so long. For most of them, it's been a decade or more that a lot of this cash has been sitting out in the ether overseas. And some of it's been poorly invested. I know there's some companies that invested in call centers in other countries that didn't pan out, research centers that didn't pan out. So a lot of these companies now, having been stung by underperforming or poor efforts overseas, want to bring the money back where they can exercise more direct control over how things happen, and they can simply be more of an integral part of it instead of having it being, on the other side of the world, too many time zones away, where it's night during our day and day during our night in these other places, which is some of the common things I hear from folks talking about these things. So the next thing to worry about is inflation. What does that do to your buying power? We've talked about inflation. That's the invisible tax. It's through money policies, the dollar in your pocket being made less valuable tomorrow than it is today without you ever doing anything. No one comes and gives you a bill for inflation. No one ever comes and says, here, I'm collecting the inflation tax. It just happens. It just suddenly means that the loaf of bread you're going to buy tomorrow is going to cost just a little bit more, which means that dollar is worth just a little bit less. And the more dollar bills floating around in any economic system causes inflation. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break right here on that happy note. We'll finish off on this conversation, then talk a little bit more about the other story I have for real estate. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right. Aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We took a quick break on the wonderful topic of inflation. We were talking about the great news about repatriation of corporate cash into the United States from overseas. And for those of you who don't know what repatriation means, I'm pretty sure most of you are on board with it. It's this reality that companies that are international make money overseas, right? And it's that money just doesn't show up in your American bank account. It's being accumulated in overseas bank accounts. In fact, some countries, in most of these other countries, you have a separate corporate entity that exists, right, to do business in that country. China is one, for instance, which is actually kind of weird in the way it forces companies to do business. We could do a whole show on that. But in any event, that's a standard thing. So in order for you to get your money back to your home country, you have to move it. You have to transfer it. And for many, many years, it has cost companies a 35% tax to repatriate their money. So in other words, I have a dollar. I want to bring it back into the United States. It would be like if you go on vacation and after you've done all your stuff and you've got cash in your pocket, if you have $1 left, they're going to make you give up 35 cents of that dollar. So you're only going to walk away with 65 cents, right? Now, that would seem ridiculous to you if some dude, as you get off the plane at JFK, coming back from whatever foreign country, says, okay, empty your pockets and we're going to take 35% of every dollar you've got, every bit of money you've got. That might cause you some discomfort. You might wonder why that's the case. And I've always wondered that myself in terms of why companies are forced to do this. Because as an American, I'd love that money to come back and benefit our economy here in the country. So anyway, a whole other argument. But in any event, we wanted to talk about what some of the downsides of this great repatriation of money is. And the first one is creates more buyers in a market where that's what we don't need more of. And it also creates inflation where the money that you have isn't the buying power of the money you have gets diminished because there are more dollars floating around in the system. Now, one thing we talked about in terms of things that aren't changing, that aren't getting better, and we talked about how the only way to solve it was through this, is inventory. There's an article from Risk Media, 10% and falling. Housing inventory keeps shrinking. And this should concern everyone. And the worst part of this is we're at a time in real estate history where brand new construction is just way too expensive in terms of paying a premium above existing homes. We've talked about these numbers before. It was like 6 to 8% used to be the premium, right? If you were looking at a 2,000 square foot, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath home, and you looked at one that was 10 years old and you looked at one that was brand spanking new, no one's ever lived in it, typically there'd be a 6 to 8% difference in the price. Well, that all changed in the 2000s. And suddenly, that premium was something in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% that you were paying in terms of a increase. If you just did it based on square footage and amenities, you're paying this huge premium for brand new property. And the reality was, people would pay it because they didn't have a choice. People were hitting frustration because in the low inventory pre-owned space, multiple offers all the time. It was nuts. I had several buyers who finally just said, forget it. We went to a new construction situation and simply said, we'll take that one. And that was it. There's no bidding. It's just you buy the house for this amount of money. All right. Buyers, according to Risk Media, this is me quoting, buyers are being challenged by diminished inventory and mounting prices, especially in areas with crisis level supply, according to the December Zillow real estate market report. And we covered this a bit already. Inventory is down 10% from last year, a 3-year trend, and in the busiest markets, as much as 40%. On the supply side, the market is starving for new homes, but it won't be easy for builders struggling with high and rising land, labor, and lumber costs. Let's also be clear. The stupid regulatory costs are also there. Maybe land is more expensive. Maybe labor is more expensive. Maybe lumber is more expensive, although it's not. Lumber prices have actually been fluctuating at an interesting rate, and while they may be a little bit higher, not enough for anyone who's actually worried about consuming a home should be worried about it. The real problem is since 2000 to 2005, the amount of costs heaped on top of builders shot through the roof. If we just went back to the fees charged in the year 2000 and got rid of everything they added since then, because remember, when the market started to take off, all these local communities, counties, and states were like, hey, we want a bigger piece of this real estate booming pie. And then, of course, when everything took a dump, they didn't withdraw those regulations. They didn't withdraw those fees. Of course, they left them. They argued about how we need to facilitate easier borrowing so that people can go deeper in debt to pay these elevated costs because builders have to charge more to cover these additional fees. If we could just do that, that would go a long way towards making it a much more manageable situation for both buyers and builders in order to provide a product that everyone needs. All right. Aging millennials and young families may be able to find more affordable new homes for sale this year, but they'll most likely be in further flung suburbs with more grueling commutes to urban job centers, unless you're willing to rent an apartment. Remember, we also talked about the huge amount of multifamily apartment-style living that's been built in some of these heavily urban areas. New homes are moving prices up 6.5% in the past year to a median of $206,300. Appreciation has been highest in San Jose, California. Those are my stomping grounds, at 21.2%, and causing inventory to shrink 40.6%. So what I wanted to do here is sort of run down the inventory changes. We've talked about this Zillow report from some other perspectives, but I thought it might be interesting to hit some of the big metropolitan areas and see the year-over-year inventory change, because there is really not much good news anywhere, with only a few exceptions. On this entire list, I think I'm seeing only 2 places that had actual growth in the year-over-year inventory. Okay, so first, the United States overall down 10%. Next on our list is New York, with year-over-year inventory drop of 15.4%. Next, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim, California. And this one's nuts. Year-over-year inventory change down 22.2%, nearly a quarter drop in the available inventory. Chicago, Illinois, down 10.8%. Dallas, Fort Worth, up 15.6%. And I actually think that's very indicative of the kind of market you have in Dallas. There's still so much kind of room to grow in Dallas. It's so much easier to build. I think it's interesting to note the policies in place in Texas and in Dallas when it comes to development versus other areas. And when you see a little bit more of a market style approach peeking in, you're seeing growth because it's meeting demand. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, down 11.3% in the inventory numbers. Houston, Texas, 2.3% increase in inventory. And Houston's notorious for its zoning, lack of zoning. A lot of people have talked about that both positively and negatively. Washington, D.C., an increase of 19%. How that's happening blows my mind. I can't help but think it has a whole lot to do. I'd love to find out why. I mean, I have some theories that aren't very complimentary, but it seems like whenever we get regulations to solve problems, the only places it actually will address some things is right in the heart of where the politicians are. And of course, that's Washington, D.C. There may be some other much more reasonable explanation, but I'd need to hear it. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, down 2.5% in inventory. Atlanta, Georgia, inventory down 14.6% year over year. Boston, Massachusetts, inventory down 15.5% year over year. And this one blows my mind because remember, this is also a city. This is a community, San Francisco, California. Now, when we talked about the Zillow numbers before, I argued about their numbers. They claimed that San Francisco had, an average home of $910,000, and I showed that was absolutely incorrect. Whether you're talking about November, December, or the entire year average, it was more like 1.2, 1.3. But they also projected a decrease in rent of 0.5%. Now, how do you balance that with this number? This is the highest decline in inventory of any of these metropolitan areas, 27.1% decline in inventory. Now, I don't argue that number is wrong. I think that's probably correct. But when you're getting that sort of stress just even on the inventory, that's also going to have pressures on renting, which tends to push rents up. Detroit, Michigan, and this one blows me away, just given what's going on in Detroit, but 12.3% decline in inventory. Riverside, California, 17.4% decline. Phoenix, Arizona, 12.8% decline. Seattle, Washington, and this doesn't surprise me one bit, 20.1% decline in inventory. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, 9.5% decline in inventory. San Diego, California, 20.2% decline. I've always liked the San Diego market. It's one of those markets where whether or not you're talking about the Gaslight District, or what do they call it? Is it the Gaslight or Lamplight? I think it's Gaslight District in San Diego. Or you're getting out of downtown and going to some of the areas surrounding. I like San Diego. I think it's a cool market. And they're really seeing a drop in inventory. Next is St. Louis, Missouri, 10.6% decline in inventory. And finally, Tampa, Florida, 12.4% decline in inventory. Some of these markets, despite these declines, are still showing some extremely respectable expected growth in costs or increase in property values. And some of these have very low barriers to entry. We just talked about Tampa, St. Louis, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Tampa, Florida, $193,000 average home price. St. Louis, $150,000. Minneapolis, St. Paul, $248,000. So these are some excellent opportunities. Atlanta, Georgia, average $186,300. Houston, Texas, $185,000. So there are some areas here that we have seen great numbers for other reasons from other reports, where the barrier to entry is low, and it feels like on the ground truth gives us some great options in terms of investment properties that could make us positive cash flow for rentals. All right. I hope that's been valuable for you folks. I think this is some interesting stuff to keep track of. Of course, we'll continue to track it here, and I'll share it as it gets presented. I think that the potential growth in really solid jobs in the United States is a great thing for real estate. And this dropping in inventory is not so good. Depending on how fast new jobs come online with the repatriation of this money, this could be a real big problem as we just see higher stresses. And all of these things that we're talking about are going to cause more and more confidence on the part of folks to jump in and say, well, you know what, I'll go ahead and I'll figure out a way to qualify for that more expensive home. I'll go ahead and go into that debt. And I think that's a concern. That's something we need to be a little bit worried about. All right. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I hope I've left more value on the table than time you've invested. That's always the end goal. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to y'all next time.